So every year we come to this Sunday and we read the gospel parable about the prodigal son. I find it kind of interesting that what the gospel account itself calls him is the lost son. But by the tradition in the West, we call him the prodigal son. Prodigal doesn't mean lost. Prodigal means waster, someone who wastes things. So he was a prodigal in that he wasted all that his father had given him. So in the Western tradition, we focus more on him losing stuff than losing himself. Because that's the real problem. He lost himself. And that's why the parable itself refers to him as the lost son, not the prodigal son. The lost son. It wasn't so much that he lost all his stuff, although that's not a good thing. We shouldn't waste our life. But that in losing his father, turning away from his father, he had nothing but to lose all his stuff too. Because all we have is given to us from God. All we have. And so when we turn our back on God, how can we keep the stuff? We lose it. We lose virtue. We lose all the qualities that make us more than an animal. And of course, that's what happens to the son. You know, at first it's fun. Whee! I don't have to control myself anymore. You know, cigarettes and whiskey and wild, wild women. You know, whee! We're just going to give ourselves away. And what happens when you give yourself away? You're lost. You lose yourself. And he becomes like an animal. He's sent out to feed the pigs. And he wants pig food. He's so hungry. Right? He loses everything that makes him more than an animal. And he just becomes an animal. Of course, a human being can't just become an animal. Because no matter how hard we try, we can't lose the image of God that's been stamped in us. And so even in the pigsty, even covered with pig manure, which is the stinkiest animal manure you've ever encountered. If we were going to do a church field trip on this Sunday, we would all take a field trip to a pig farm, just so that we could experience together what it would be like for this young man. It's stinky stuff. And this is the prodigal's life, because he had lost his father and thus began to lose his humanity. Right? But you can't completely lose it. And that's why it was possible at the darkest point. You know, some people have to hit bottom before they start to look up. Some people have to hit the ground and drag in the gutter for a while before they go, wait a minute, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? What am I doing with myself? And at that point, a little spark ignited inside him. A little light went on inside him. And he said, wait a minute. In my father's house, the slaves, the servants, they get it better than I do here. It would be better to be a slave in my father's house than to stay here. You know that verse that says it's better to be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord than to dwell in the tents or in the wealth of the wicked, right? It's better to be the lowest one. And so he says, I'm going to go to my Father. And of course, the Father's looking for him. That's the amazing thing. While he was yet a long way off. God is always waiting for us to turn to him. He's waiting. I was reading the homily of St. Nikolai Velimirovich this morning on the prodigal son. And he says, there are three qualities of the Father which tell us what love is. The first is that he was patient, but not patient in the sense of standing in a line, patient in the sense of suffering for a long time. Long suffering. That's the old English word, right? That's the word we used to use. Now we just use the word patient, and it doesn't really have the same meaning. It's long suffering. His son was gone, and he was in pain and suffering, and he suffered for a long time. Love suffers long, St. Paul says. Love suffers long. The second thing was he forgave. When the son came back, having lost everything he had given him and smelling like pig manure, he embraced him and kissed him. Right? The older son was worried about the stuff. Oh, he wasted your stuff. The father loved his son. He wasn't worried about what the son had lost. He was worried that his lost son was lost. And now that his son was back, he forgave all. Right? Put a robe on him. The robe is Jesus Christ, the robe of Christ. Put a ring on his hand. That's the authority of the family. Like when you get married, you get a ring on. This means you belong to one another, right? Put shoes on his feet. Guide him in the way. Slaughter the fatted calf. This is Jesus himself who is slaughtered for our salvation.